Thank you.
Okay, Chair, the recording is started if you want to make a start.
Seconds, let me just pull up my agenda again because I've just closed my notes. Okay, welcome everybody to the CJC meeting being held on the 7th of December 2022. Welcome all. We'll move first to declarations of interest, please. So does anybody have any declarations of interest for today's agenda? Owain, I'll come to you first.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just declaring agenda item 6, then the options report on the budget, Chair. If I could step away at that point, that'd be great.
Okay, certainly, no problem. Are there any other declarations for today?
I see none, Chair.
Sorry, apologies.
I just confirming I can see no other hands raised, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Chloe. On then to minutes of the previous meetings from the 11th of October, pages 3 to 18. I've had no request for any amendments, but happy to take any if there are any now. If not, I'm happy to move them as a true record. Could I have a seconder, please?
Second, Chair.
Thank you. All those in favour? Okay, thank you, colleagues. Those are agreed. And we move then to the forward work programme, pages 19 to 22. This one's for noting. The March meeting has been rescheduled and will now take place on the 30th of March 2023. And diary invites were sent out yesterday, so those shouldn't have now updated in your diaries. Was there anything else anybody wanted to comment on the forward programme? Are we all happy with that?
Yeah.
Okay then, so we'll move to our first substantive item, which is approval of the statement of accounts for 21-22. And I'll go to Chris Moore for this one. Chris?
Thank you, Chair. And whilst you say it's a substantive item, it is an item that needs approval, but it's an item that actually contains very limited information as such. You will recall, or the committee will recall, that earlier this year, in January, that the committee agreed to set a zero budget for 21-22 and raise no levy, bearing in mind that was towards the end of the year as we were setting up the CJC. The consequence of that meant that there weren't any transactions for 21-22, although the way the regulations are written, there is a requirement to produce what we call a statement of accounts and a confirmation of the financial position during the year. So the statement that is included within the report is a statement saying that there is no transactions during the year and that the auditor needs that formally approved by the joint committee to conclude that year. So very much a statement to say that there is nothing happened during the year as per the budget. There were no transactions. If you recall, all the transactions were run through the lead authority at that point in time through the grant funding for the creation of the CJC and was part of City and County of Swansea's accounts, and therefore we were able to avoid a lot of administration. But I do need this statement approved as being a statement saying that we have taken due process and that we certify that there were no transactions in respect of the CJC for the financial year 21-22. The auditor will then confirm that, and that will conclude that financial year. So with anticipation of this being approved this afternoon, I anticipate that the Auditor General will conclude it on Monday next week. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. That's really clear. As you say, a technical report which is required, but not a lot in there, but we need to do it anyway. I hope opening it up for questions or comments if anybody has any. If not, then could I ask my leader colleagues if they could indicate whether they're in support, please? Thank you very much. That's unanimous.
Proposal and seconder.
Oh, sorry, apologies. Yeah, I'll move it seconder. Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Well prompted there. Okay, so that is approved. We'll move then on to the next item, which is considerations in respect of the budget for the forthcoming year, 23-24. And again, I'll go to Chris, and this is on pages 31 to 48. Owain, yes, you've declared your interest, so we'll let you dip out and we'll call you back in once we've finished with the item.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. This is more substantive, and it has provoked some conversation of late, bearing in mind the financial pressures that the constituent authorities are under, not least because of energy and inflation costs, and the opportunity of the funding from Welsh Government, which is going to actually put us all in some quite difficult position in terms of balancing our budgets this year. So the inevitable position of the CJC, we have been in its infancy this year, and we are developing into future years, of which the development is substantially moving forward with bigger workloads within the work streams, and therefore along comes the budgets with that information. So the initial sort of presentation of the budget is actually attached within these papers, and it's contained on the first appendix and the appendix of Appendix A, which actually gives you a full budget evaluation of what is ideally what we would want to do to put the CJC into full workstream mode next year, developing the 4 work areas, i.e. economic development, planning, transport and energy, which includes then the regional transport plan, the strategic plan for planning, and the economic development plan. Now, obviously, that entails employing staff and commissioning certain pieces of work. And within the report, you can see the contents of that and the way that that's been built up by each of the work streams. That has led to effectively a potential cost on the CJC next year of £1.5 million, which is roughly about £1 million drift on current year, where we were just developing the work stream, and bearing in mind that you also got the support officer in Owen Enoch within this and all the governance arrangements. That certainly presented some sort of concerns in terms of discussions with authorities in terms of where we stand with the CJC being a further pressure on the budget of the constituent authorities. And there's a piece of work being done, and details of this is actually contained within the first part of the narrative of the report over the options we got to actually downsize or downscale some of the work that is done next year to try and help the budget. What you will see is there are a number of options that are put in front of you. 3, option 1, which is to agree to prioritise the CJC and levy accordingly, which is the Appendix A that I've just referred to. The second option then is to do a minimum in 2023-24 and downsize the budget with limited work going on in each of the work streams. Having said that, still trying to progress at a far lower level some of the work, and that includes the regional transport plan, where there is an element of budget supporting that plan going forward, but with the recognition that there needs to be support from Welsh Government in terms of additional funds to take it totally forward, as there has been previously. And the other one, which is a far more difficult one and not within our remit today, is to actually suspend all activities on the CJC into 23-24. As I understand it, for us to do that, the Welsh Government would have to amend legislation to accommodate that, and the monitoring officer may want to come in and comment just to explain that in a bit more detail, because he is probably professionally more competent to explain it in a bit more detail than myself. But that is something that we could consider. It is something that we could actually label as being an option, possibly not for 23-24, but for 24-25, because I think the pressures on budgets are going to continue into the further future. But that is something for consideration here today. But as we stand today, we do need to set about a draft budget. And there are 2 budgets on the table here today. One is the fully fledged delivery of what would be an ideal CJC next year. And the second is a downsize, which is doing the minimum, but doing the priority areas as far as possible. That won't be total delivery of all areas, but that'll be partial delivery of some of the work streams. Now, that does come out with a budget, which is in Appendix C of 617,000, which is marginally above the current year budget. So the levies that each authority will see is there or thereabouts are very similar, bearing in mind the levies are apportioned on population size. There will be consideration that we need to give to in January as to whether there's a significant amount of work that actually, if we fall on this one, that needs to be considered in terms of planning, and whether there needs to be any levy placed on the national parks. But the view that was taken current year is that that wasn't significant enough to warrant the levy, and that is a debate depending where we finalise this year. So this is a draft budget. This is asked for today for the committee to approve one or t'other of the budgets, so we are able to notify constituent authorities of the indicative budget. There is a requirement in the legislation that it comes back again in January for formal approval and finalisation, which is the back end of January, where we will do a bit more fine-tuning of Appendix C, should Appendix 3 be the option that the committee members go for today. As I say, it covers off the governance responsibility, it covers off the staffing of the individuals that are employed, and it gives a smaller level of taking forward each of the work streams at a minimum level, whilst recognising some of the priorities that we've got there. But it's certainly a challenge at this point in time with some of the constituent authority pressures. This will, by looking at Appendix C, it will actually save a further £1 million on the 4 constituent authorities budget, which is quite substantial with some of the savings that we're looking at. But it is for the CJC to decide today, and it is something that whichever way the CJC decides, the levy will be enacted and the constituent authorities will have to support that levy. So hopefully, Chair, that gives an overview of the position. I haven't gone into each of the individual budget heads, but I think they're clearly marked there for what they are. And hopefully there's enough information within the report that explains the route that each of the work streams, the individual subsections are going, and what they will be able to deliver on the do minimum side, as opposed to the fully fledged delivery of the whole of the proposal, should we have gone for the full Appendix A, which is the £1.5 million. So perhaps at that point, I will take any questions, or perhaps colleagues may want to add some more comments to my summary.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I'll go to Karen next, and then I will come to Craig, and then I will open it up for comments and questions. Karen?
Just to add to what Chris has just said, Rob, just to be clear about what we're proposing in terms of activity. You've approved an energy plan earlier this year, and we're getting funding via a different route via the Wales Energy Service to progress that work. So we're content that we can have a really minimal budget provision, but still get on with the work around the energy work stream. We could do more work on the economic development strategy, but actually a lot of it's linked to the energy work anyway. And we're comfortable that we could reduce back the budget requirement to get some work progressed next year. That leaves us then with transport and strategic development plan. Unfortunately, we've still got a lack of clarity as to what support we're going to get from Welsh Government in terms of resourcing the regional transport plan. And we know that that is a priority for leaders. So a proposal with the option C that Chris has just outlined is that we would have sufficient money to employ somebody to start to coordinate that work. We've got an underspend that we're projecting in this year's budget, which can sit in a reserve should we need to do more. But our plan would be to press the Welsh Government for more certainty and clarity on what resource they're going to put into the regional transport planning activity between now and when we bring the budget back in January. I know Martin and Mark Wade have been pressing them over recent weeks, but unfortunately we still haven't got that certainty that we're looking for. So we're working on the basis in option C that you will want to prioritise the transport planning work next year, but what we'll need to do is to carry on pressing the Welsh Government for the money, but the backstop would be that we'd have this 80k that we're planning in the budget, with the ability to draw some small amounts of resources from the reserve should we need to. And then in terms of the strategic development planning work, there's still consultation going on around timescales and around the approach around that. So we think, again, there's further conversations needed with the Welsh Government, but given everything else that's going on at the moment, we think we should be writing formally and asking for the timescale for the strategic development plan to be extended, because there's a number of authorities that have got significant activities within their local development plans that they've got to progress with. So it isn't just a financial issue, it's also workforce pressure. So those, I just wanted to add that, Rob, just to try and clarify, for the money that Chris is presenting, that's the activity that we would be proposing that we take forward.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Craig, in terms of the option that Chris referenced around hibernation, essentially.
Of course, well, thank you, Chair. And so just picking on the point, obviously, that Chris mentioned, as we all know, the Local Government and Elections Wales Act was legislation which ultimately created the establishment of the corporate joint committees. So according to that rule and the law and legislation, we have to have corporate joint committees, and we had tasks to undertake certain functions. The only way ultimately to be able to step away from that would be if Welsh Government ultimately chose to change the law to remove the obligation to have these corporate joint committees. So it is open, obviously, for representations to be made to Welsh Government for them to consider those related matters. But as it stands at the moment, by law, we have to have the CJC, we have to have a defined programme of certain activities, as we've mentioned ultimately in the report, but there is that option, obviously, of a more minimalistic approach in certain areas. But we can't get around the fact that legally we have these obligations, that we have to actually undertake this work at this stage, and we have to have the various structures ultimately in place, such as corporate policies, various committees in that sense, because statutory there's an obligation there.
Thank you, Craig. Before I bring David in, just to say, I think fully agree. I won't repeat all of the comments and points made by Karen and Chris, but essentially, if you look at the budget options there, as Craig has said, we have to have a CJC. It would be ridiculous of us to fund the CJC and then have no outputs. And as Karen referenced, there is funding which we can tap into for the energy stream, and there is potential recirculation of this year's budget, which we can do to progress the work on the transport work stream, whilst we get further clarification and hopefully a more positive response from the Minister in terms of transport plan funding. So it is a priority for us to get that work done. We don't want to be in a position where regionally we lose out on the opportunity for large parts of transport infrastructure funding because we haven't done the necessary work. So I think it strikes the right compromise in terms of ensuring we continue to progress locally, but that we, as Karen has suggested, and I would support that we write in the strongest terms we can to the Minister to ensure that we get the necessary support. And I would say more broadly than that, for those of you who were involved in discussions with ministers prior to the setup of the CJCs, it was to be a layer of coordination that was not going to place additional burden on local authorities. That was always the principle. And again, I think given the challenges that all local authorities are facing in terms of budgets at the moment, it's right that we restate that position and require Welsh Government to provide the necessary funding to support the CJC activities. So that's what I would recommend formally as chair, and obviously endorse the comments that Chris and Karen have made previously, but I'll open it up. David, come to you first.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I think Karen's actually answered my main question, and that was on the subcommittees costs, where they all started off at 20,000. The economic development finished at 405,000, planning 236, transport 368, and energy, well, still remains on 20,000. But obviously, you're saying there's the work that's already been done and is funded elsewhere anyway?
That's right, David. And Stephen might be able to confirm if you need a bit more information, but the Wales Energy Service has been supporting the development of the Regional Energy Plan, and they're now supporting and resourcing the development of the local energy plans. So there is funding in the system that's come via a different route that enables that work to progress. So I don't know, Chair, if you want to bring Stephen in, because he's got a bit more detail should David need it.
Yeah, happy to do that, Steve, if you'd like.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Karen. Yes, happy to confirm that, as indicated by Karen, you have, of course, already approved the Regional Energy Strategy earlier on this year. We have a Regional Energy Core group of officers who've been working with the Welsh Government Energy Service over a number of years and with partners to produce the strategy, and that core group remains intact. Welsh Government have approached us, as indeed they have approached the 3 other regions, to offer additional support for the next 2 years, I think it is. At least 2, possibly 3 officers to help with the rollout of the local energy action plan, area plans, and also the further work developing the regional energy strategy, i.e. getting it into the action plan and then supporting individual projects to come forward. In addition to that, as a region and led by Neath Talbot, we have submitted a bid to the UK government for what's referred to as a launch pad initiative, and that, if we're successful, and we won't know till spring, I think it is now, 23, that could provide a further 7 million of grant funding to enable small and medium enterprises to bring forward schemes that will contribute to their energy strategy action plan. So with the support of the Welsh Government, we should be in a position to have additional resources in the next 3 months or so.
Okay, thank you, Steve. That's really helpful. David, did you have any follow-ups on that?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for that. I think it's important that people can understand the accounts. When you look at the difference in the figures, it's important that they know that the work has been done, where the financing is from, and it's not just we're not going to spend any more on the energy side, But yeah, as you said in your remarks just now, I think option 2 is the only way forward. Sort of option 3 maybe put on a back burner would be the desired effect, but I think we have to keep it going. We have to go forward a bit, and the cost is my concern. If you go for option 1, my contribution rises to £207,000 per annum, and likewise everybody rises. Well, that it's very difficult getting it through council at the moment that CJCs is a good thing, because they weren't meant to cost us any more money, and it just seems another vehicle, if you like, that we're adding all these people to and costing a lot more money per authority. So personally, I think from Pembrokeshire's point of view, the only way forward is option what I would class as option 2, and keep on going that way.
Okay, thank you, David. That's really clear. Steve?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I'll follow on a little bit off the back of David. I'm new to the CJC, and I'm sure it's a vehicle, and it's probably produced in times when the financial ratio was a lot stronger. Excellent work, and I mean, I certainly agree and support your proposals, Rob. Up with option 2, transport is certainly a massive problem across Wales and certainly within our own valleys and communities. But I just wondered, listening to Chris and what Craig has said, and Karen touched it as well, are we talking about one of our meetings having a discussion to look at, I think, Chris, it was who mentioned, the financial climate is not going to get any easier. It's going to get a lot tougher. And I just need to be sure that we're in a position that the funding or what we need for the CJC will give the outcomes and the developments that we need. obviously you touched on Welsh Government backing, of course, but will Welsh Government be in a position to continue the same kind of support going forward? So I just wondered, are we going to have that conversation at some point? Option 2 for this meeting now, yes, but are we having that conversation in the future? Because I think we need to do it sooner rather than later, or otherwise we might not be able to start the process. And I don't know how long it would take to change the law with Welsh Government. And I'm sorry if people are working for the CJC, but I'm thinking with where we are and where we're going to be. So I think you get where I'm coming from, but I just wanted clarity on will we be looking at that option going forward in the future? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think let's divorce the two things. As Chris said, we've got to set a draft budget for today, and that's what we're doing. So, you know, if we are, I'll bring Darren in a second. But if we're corralling around the same option, then we've got a clear way forward for our draft budget. And obviously, we need to revisit that in the new year. Then, in terms of setting the formal budget, I think there's a separate question then around where in the programme of work for government and the structures that they want to fund do CJCs operate. At the moment, there's no indication at all from Welsh Government that they're prepared to reconsider anything around CJCs. It seems to be the direction of travel. But I think our combined position you'll find across Wales is that those CJCs need to be properly funded in order for them to do the work the Welsh Government want them to do. And that's the quid pro quo of that. And that's always been our position since the start of the discussion. So I don't think we're going to shy away from those discussions, Steve. I think they will continue to happen. Okay, so I'll bring Darren in next.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I won't repeat what's been stated already. I think we're all on the same page here, but I wanted to just formally support option 2. Really, I think it's as you mentioned, it's a sensible compromise given where we are financially, and certainly as you know, as a newly elected leader here in Carmarthenshire, you know, we're currently working through the process now, looking at our budget for next year. You know, the principle is we're trying to protect frontline services. You know, and as an authority, we're having to look at back office, administration, and a whole range of other areas to try and drive out efficiencies. And I don't think that the CJC can be immune from that, really. I think you picked up on a really important point, Rob, in terms of your opening remarks there. Clearly, I wasn't around when the CJCs were introduced, but clearly I remember the discussions at the time, the discussions that were happening at the national level. And as you say, I think the direction of travel is quite clear, and the noises at the time were that actually this regional working would be funded centrally, you know, and there wouldn't be that additional costs facing authorities. Now, if we were to implement option 1, that would clearly have an impact in terms of our budget position as a council, and it's not something I could support, you know. So I absolutely endorse what's being proposed, and clearly there's a discussion to be had with Welsh Government, not just on CJCs, but regional working more generally, because each and every body that we establish brings with it its own administration costs and additional pressures on council budget. So I welcome the review. I'm mindful that the Welsh Government have initiated a review of regional structures, and I absolutely welcome that, because I think it's high time we have that debate in terms of what does it actually add and what value are we getting for it at the end of the day. Diolch.
Okay, thank you, Darren. Diolch. Tegrin.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick one, really. Obviously, we don't have a vote on this one, but obviously the decision you take today has an implication on the SDP, which we do. So it was just to say, I think in our discussions, we entirely support the direction of travel you're suggesting on this in relation to that.
Thank you, Tegrin. That's really helpful and appreciated. Okay, I don't think we had any particular questions for Chris or for Karen. Chris, was there anything you wanted to say in final comments, or other than that, I'll go to the vote. I think we're clear in terms of where we're going.
The only comment that I did miss out on, and just to put it in context, it doesn't matter to the decision, is that I should have referenced Appendix B, which actually labels a £9 million bill over 5 years, which I think we all ought to focus on if we're going on the fully fledged thing, because that is quite a big burden over 5 years. So we've got to question that. But I think that goes aligned with the conversations that we'll be taking forward in the longer term as opposed to the shorter term.
Okay. Well, we have the draft budget there. So I'm happy to move that. Could I ask for a seconder, please, that we go for recommendation of option 2, because that was the concept. All in favour? Thank you, colleagues. So again, that's carried unanimously. Thank you, colleagues. That's really helpful. We move now then to
Owen back in, Chair.
Okay, thank you,
Stay with
Chloe.
me 1 second. He's back in now, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome back, Owen. We'll move then to item 7, which is the presentation regarding the strategic development plan. Welcome Tom Evans from Swansea Council. Tom, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, all. I'm just going to share my screen for a few slides, not too many. I should just say apologies. On the agenda pack sent out, the version of the slides was not bilingual, but we've got the bilingual ones now, and the agenda will be updated on that. So what I wanted to set out on a few slides really was some of the background briefly in terms of the requirements for the strategic development plan, the SDP, and progress made thus far, and some of the options going forward. And I will hand over to Martin for some recommendations then in the final slides. So just to remind everyone, really, in terms of the SDP, I think everyone knows this is a statutory requirement. It was written into the legislation, and it is the main planning output of the CJC as things stand. There may well be other functions, other planning functions of the CJC as we go forward over time. I'm sure some of the issues around sharing technical expertise on a regional basis and so on will be there, but the main thing, as has been discussed, is the production of this plan. And again, to remind, the significance of this is that this SDP will have exactly the same status for us as for local authorities in our decision making as our LDPs and the new national plan Future Wales has. So, Wales does have this 3-tier system now of development plans. All planning applications submitted will be considered against the LDP, against Future Wales, and against these SDPs when they come forward. And again, the other significant aspect is that when they are produced, those LDPs that are produced under them, because the requirement doesn't fall away for LDPs, they will be a different sort of document. They will be lighter, more agile, but hopefully prepared over a quicker time frame and so on, and focused more on those local issues. But they must align with whatever is agreed by all authorities and by the CJC for the plan as it emerges. And as we know, the whole purpose really is to move the agenda on to planning on a regional basis, tackling those issues that are cross-boundary, that have wider than local significance. Some of those key issues around areas of major protection areas, major landscape belts and green belts and green wedges and so on. Some of the big transport issues that there's already been highlighted, major strategic development areas that will be allocated. They will all be come forward in the SDP rather than the LDPs. So in terms of progress so far, well, there hasn't been any substantive progress. This year, as has been discussed, it was minimal budget stuff allocated for items, including this one, and as such, there was no work to progress any of the key stages of the SDP. Just jump into that point there about cross-boundary collaboration. You know, it's not to say that there is no regional work that is happening. We work together as jointly as planning authorities on plenty of strategic planning work. But where we do that, really, it's been to inform individual emerging local development plans, and it's the sort of stuff that we need to do anyway to evidence those plans. But it will provide, the work that's ongoing at the moment will provide evidence for that SDP once it starts. And taking a couple of the major items that have been worked on. One is to define what's described in Future Wales as the national growth area for South West Wales. So that piece of work is honing in on the area shown in Future Wales as the area for substantive growth. But it's it's globular, it's a mass at the moment in Future Wales, and we need to refine that down, make a more sort of sensible shape, and so it looks the draft findings of that it looks a little bit different, and can concentrate on those areas where there are going to be major allocations realistically. And also the other thing is looking at what's happening in terms of future growth projections, in terms of our population growth, the new data coming forward, what sort of levels of housing growth, employment growth are we going to need on a regional basis, and then LDPs as they emerge fall out of that sort of work. So again, that's highlighting the significance of it, really. Options have been put forward, as you will have seen during the course of the year, in terms of how the SDP can be taken forward, and it is all dependent really on these budget issues that have been discussed. The other item of note is that the Welsh Government is doing an informal consultation with planning authorities and some of the development sector on a sort of guidance manual for what should be in SDPs and how they should be produced, over what time frame, and so on. And there is we're looking to feedback with comments on that as regions. So that certainly the aim is to produce, put forward a response to that from the South West Wales planning region. I'm sure the South East and Mid Wales North will do the same, and then there'll be a full consultation on that manual next year. So what does the CJC need to agree? Well, I think it is how we now, and again this has been touched on, how do we engage with Welsh Government on this matter going forward? How what are the sort of political discussions, and what are the discussions between officials that need to happen, including things like responding to that consultation about the manual, and also about the money. Significantly, the timescales. When are we going to start it substantively? How long is it reasonably going to take, having regard to resources, and that third item there? Well, what is the budget? And obviously that's what we've been touching on. And again, it overlaps with, well, this comes out of the decisions around budget. Well, what does that mean then in terms of staff resources and the management of the whole process? How can we finance it? And that's again related to, well, where do things stand? What are the issues? What are the risks? Well, fundamentally, if there is no identified budget to deliver the SDP, then there won't be work to progress it. There are no existing resources within planning authorities. Those discussions have been had, and unsurprisingly, no one has any spare resource to be able to divert from existing work streams to do this regional work. And it's quite the opposite, in fact, and we're struggling to deliver on some of our outputs with the resources that we've got. Some authorities are struggling to recruit planners and so on, and that issue of recruitment would be an issue in time for the CJC and for the delivery of the SDP as well. that will need its own staff, or it will need staff dedicated to delivering that output. And as I say, it links into those ongoing issues of recruitment and finding experienced planners to do that work. And the final one I just highlight there is in terms of a forward planning output. One of the most significant ones for all authorities is the delivery of replacement LDPs. They're all at slightly different dates of commencement, but all authorities are either moving towards it or undertaking it, and any diversion of those resources is going to have implications on the delivery of those LDPs, and in some cases that the delivery will be very significant for those where the plan end dates will pass. So there's just a couple of final slides there on where we go from here then, and what are the recommendations to being put to the CJC, and they all relate to those 3 points of what should we do in terms of engaging with Welsh Government, what should be the timescale, having regard to the budget implications. So I think I'll hand over to Martin on those two slides, but happy to come in at any point, Martin, or obviously for any questions as well.
Thank you, Tom. Martin?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And thanks, Tom. Yeah, just going to make a couple of points, and then I'm not sure if Stephen wants to come in as a sort of lead for the planning strand and the CJC. I think, Chair, the reality is those questions have largely been answered by the debate you just had on the budget, and without repeating that, obviously in terms of certainly as far as the strategic development plan is concerned, that initial minimalistic approach, certainly over the next 12 months. During that period, clearly there will need to be ongoing dialogue with Welsh Government around the future timescale and the potential for future funding to be able to be provided to assist in the delivery of the strategic development plan. So essentially what's happening today is if you, I guess, accept what's being proposed, is that we're deferring it and moving it to the right by 12 months while that further dialogue takes place, as opposed to committing substantive resources in the next financial year. And that seems to accord with the conversation that you had earlier over the budget. So there's clearly a lot of work that still needs to be done, and there's a lot of clarification that needs to be obtained before we can fix that timescale. But it's been largely determined and driven by the conversation you had on the budget earlier. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Okay, Tom, did you want to come back in at all?
I will just highlight in terms of the a couple of items on the engagement with Welsh Government. That it would be good to get that agreement on how we write to them, seeking not only in terms of what are the funding options, how are they going to assist with this process, but there's this specific item and agreeing in principle here, and as a region that we will push back on some of those elements that are set out in the draft manual, including how long they foresee this process to take, because clearly if it starts late, it's going to take longer.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think look, we've had obviously discussions recently with the Minister in the Partnership Council and other meetings where she's indicated her willingness to talk to us about some of these things and to see what we can do in terms of the level of resources across Wales, both in Welsh Government and elsewhere for dealing with planning matters and strategic planning matters. So I think absolutely we should be writing. As Martin said, I think we've already indicated in our previous discussion where we are in terms of the budget for this year. So that moving of 12 months to the right seems consistent with that. So this item is only for information, but Tom, if you want to stop sharing your screen, I'll open it up then if anybody's got any comments or technical questions that they have, which obviously we'll open up for a bit of discussion.
Looks like Rob's frozen there, is it? Oh, there we go.
Yeah, apologies if for some reason I was on hold. Steve, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Tom, I just want to ask something. I recognise what Rob has said and Martin with regards where we are sort of stalling now. Planning is so important as well. I think Rob sort of summarised the conversations. I just wondered what resources we have as CJC to make sure that we don't get lost in some of the planning aspects of it, because Welsh Government have got some very huge development ideas, Rob, as you would know, in your many hats. You know, wanted to build 50% of social housing, you know, the massive replacement local development plans. We do that within house, of course, local authorities, but there's loads of implications. So I just wonder that, of course, transport is what we've decided, but this is massive as well. And I didn't know the role of the CJC without resources. What can we do? Have that conversation with the government, but make sure we are clear of how it affects us, because over the next few years, critical housing, as we know, and other planning, if we're not able to resource it, what will we be able to do? I'm thinking of a different plan. Have we got something to with lack of resources, what can we do that we still don't miss critically in the planning system? Sorry, I'm not being very precise in what I'm saying, but
no, I think it's a really good point.
You know, but yeah, I think you get what I'm saying.
Yeah,
you'll get used to me in the long anyway. But thanks for that, Rob. Just if you could pick that point up.
No worries, Steve. I'm sure Tom will pick that point up.
Yeah, no, I do think it's a good point, and you know, the biggest thing I think we need to do, as well as keep up that, you know, those lines of communication going with Welsh Government at the sort of, you know, officials level, and we do have a decent working relationship actually, which is an advantage in terms of those officers at Welsh Government, and they are understanding of the position that we are in as well, which does help. But I think above all else, it's about working, you know, continuing to work cross-boundary, you know, authorities working collaboratively on the sorts of projects that I mentioned, and you know, it's important that there isn't going forward just a focus on our own forward plans, on our own local development plans, you know, without an appreciation of what's happening next door. And, you know, and it's exactly what Welsh Government would say. To be fair, they would say, well, you know, there's a reason that we're introducing going towards this system of regional plans, and it's to deal with these issues. You know, to be fair to them, and we do want to, and it is a sensible format, but at the same time, it's you know, without budgets coming forward from them or wherever, it's impossible to do so. So I think that's the point, is that we do work well across boundary, and we'll continue to do that and make sure that LDPs coming forward have that you know, that sort of nod to the future and awareness that the SDP is just on the horizon.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tom. Okay, I don't see any other hands up, and this item is just an information update, so there's no decision on this today. But really grateful, Tom, for the information, and Martin. I think that's really helpful, and we'll no doubt revisit this in due course. So with that, thank you very much. We'll move on to item 8, which is the draft corporate plan for 23 to 28. So I'll hand over to Karen.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I pay tribute to Owain, who's done most of the work on this. So just to explain what this document is, you'll be aware that in addition to the responsibility for producing a transport plan and a strategic development plan, that the CJC has also been made responsible for a whole set of public sector requirements. So that includes the requirement to set wellbeing objectives, to have regard to the Equalities Act, and so on and so forth. So what this document is doing is discharging all those wider public sector duties, And I think because the CJC is in its infancy, it's clearly going to be a document that's going to evolve as the CJC matures. So it's very much a very basic document. The key parts of the document are on page 17, where you've got a proposed vision statement for the CJC. It's been drawn from the Economic Development Plan and the Regional Energy Strategy we saw earlier in the year, and also with a nod to what the legislation requires around regional transport planning and strategic development planning. And then the 3 wellbeing objectives that are being proposed. The first one commits to the Economic Delivery Plan and Regional Energy Strategy. The second one makes a commitment to improving transport outcomes linked to the duty to provide a regional transport plan. And then the third one sets some outcomes there based around the statutory duty to prepare the strategic development plan. So the 3 wellbeing objectives we propose and very much reflect the statutory framework that we're required to work within. And then there's also a proposed equality objective, which is a statutory requirement on page 94. And again, what that's doing is just committing to delivering more equal South West Wales by 2035. And it makes reference then to poverty, to the Llwybr Newydd commitments on transport and infrastructure, and also in terms of community cohesive community, sorry. So they're there for you to comment on, Chair, in terms of the wellbeing objectives. As I say, they reflect the statutory duty, so I don't think there's anything particularly remarkable about them. And then as you go further on into the plan, you've got some descriptions in there of the governance arrangements around the CJC. I suppose the other key part of the plan then is the appendices. So you'll note that Appendix 1 hasn't been written up because we needed to have the discussion about the budget first in order to decide which activities we're going to write into Appendix 1. What you've got in Appendix 2 is the work that we would have undertaken had you gone for the first option of the 1.5 million. So if you approve this as a draft today, what our intention would be is to strip out of Appendix 2 the activities that will now support the budget option that you have given us the go-ahead earlier on in the meeting for, and this will all come back to you then in March for you to see a final version which hopefully reflects the final budget, if that makes sense. There is a requirement for public consultation, so we'd be looking to undertake that between January and the March meeting. So there's an opportunity to get some wider engagement on the plan itself. But as I say, it's a fairly basic statement of what the CJC has been set up to do, some proposed wellbeing objectives, some activity details at the back end of the plan. But over time, it'll mature and it'll become quite a different entity. I think the only other thing I would say, because unfortunately, the way the law is written, you have to include a lot of detail in these publications. But for most members of the public, what they're really interested in is what is the CJC and what is it going to do next year. So I think a plan on a page is something that we'll be bringing back in March as well, which will give you a succinct summary of what we're proposing to do in the year ahead. So happy to take any questions on there, but as I say, tributes to Owain really, who's been working hard on this, and having developed the Appendix 2, we were then debating around the budget, and obviously we've got to rework that now so it fits within the resource constraints.
Okay, thank you, Karen. That was really clear. And again, echo your thanks to Owain for the work that's gone into this. As you said, it's a document which contains a lot of information, and I think that slimmed down summary will be really helpful in our communications with the wider public. So I don't see any hands up there. I'm happy to move this report, or the draft corporate plan. Could I ask for a seconder, please? Yeah, thank you, David. And if we can then go to the vote, all those in favour, please. Thank you very much. Again, that is carried unanimously. So thank you, colleagues. We go to item 9 then, which is the Environment Wales Act 2016, Section 6, Biodiversity and Resilience of Ecosystems Duty. Snappy title, and back to Karen.
And again, if I can bring Owain in to present this, Rob, it's a very, very brief report, which again, just ticks off one of those statutory duties that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Owain, if you'd like to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Karen. Yeah, building on many of the points that Karen made previously, this is a reflection of those wider corporate duties. Clearly, as constituent councils, we're bound by the Environment Act requirements, but also as the Corporate Joint Committee we are. So given, obviously, we're in a relatively early stage, this is very much about capturing some of those key principles of the environment in terms of our corporate governance, how we're going to embed these considerations moving forward. But essentially, there is a requirement to publish a statement by the 31st of December. So we're just seeking your endorsement, really, members, on the proposed statement, and subject to your approval, it'll be published, and a copy will be sent to the Welsh Government for information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Owain. Again, very straightforward. So I'm happy to move the report. Could I ask for a seconder again, please? Thank you, David. And if I could go to colleagues to show their support. Thank you very much. That's again unanimously carried. On then to our final item, which is listed for today, which is the National Parks co-opted members to the South West Wales Corporate Joint Committee. Craig, I'll come to you.
Thank you very much then, Chair. So as members will know, the role of national parks predominantly is limited within the Corporate Joint Committee to our strategic planning work. Following some discussions with national park colleagues, we've been looking at alternative ways, obviously, we can involve them in the various other matters that the Corporate Joint Committee is going to deal with. So the proposal ultimately before members today is that for the actual Corporate Joint Committee and some of its subcommittees, we extend a co-opted non-voting status to leaders from the national park authorities. So that way then they have the ability to be a presence of those meetings and to speak and give views on various matters, but they wouldn't be able to vote on any matters outside of strategic planning. So just to clarify one particular point that's in paragraph 7 of the report, there's no need for them to be a co-opted status on the Regional Transport Planning Subcommittee because they do have a voting right anyway on that one. So I can just correct that for future reference. The other element then to it, obviously we have scrutiny committee that has been established and that met for the first time a few weeks ago. It will be proposed that again we extend co-opted non-voting status to one representative from Brecon Beacons National Park and Pembrokeshire National Park Authority to attend the overview and scrutiny committees when that meets on its regular intervals and patterns. So just before members today, hopefully for sanction, Chair, and subject to that being approved, I'll liaise with national park authorities to agree the necessary representatives and agree the necessary co-option agreements.
Thank you, Craig. Again, similar to the arrangements that we've worked successfully within the City deal previously with co-opted partners, I think it's a good compromise and provides a good voice for national parks in all of those bodies and committees. Then, so that should work very well. Hopefully, if it follows anything like the City region. So, open it up if anybody's got any comments. If not, then happy to move that. Could I ask for a seconder again, please? Thank you, David. And if I could ask colleagues to show if they're in support, please. Thank you very much. And again, that's unanimously carried. So thank you, colleagues. That brings us to the end of the agenda for today. I have not been notified of any urgent items, but it just remains for me to say thank you all for attending and wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year and healthy New Year. And look forward to working with you all